Hi, welcome back to another Sunday. We are going through our Knowing Jesus in a New Way lesson. And as you probably notice in these lessons, they kind of build on each other. So each week I'll go back and we'll summarize what we heard in the previous weeks in case you missed the other videos. Also, it's just helpful to remind ourselves of all these new ways Jesus is being known. Known in absence. The Marys and Peter and John went back to the tomb, and when they came there, they noticed the stone had been rolled away. And when they went inside, they did not see Jesus. They could feel his presence in the absence, but Jesus was gone, truly gone. Mary Magdalene stood outside weeping. Peter and John went back. Mary stayed. "Woman, why are you weeping? Jesus has gone. Tell the disciples to meet him in Galilee." "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she turned and she saw someone, and he must have been the gardener. "Tell me where they have taken him," said Mary, "and I will go." "Mary." This time he said her name, and she knew it was he. She must have stepped forward because Jesus said, "No, you cannot hold me. I have risen, but I have not yet ascended." Known in the breaking of the bread. Two of Jesus' followers made their way slowly toward Emmaus, some 7 miles from Jerusalem. And while they were on their road, they were talking. They were talking about everything that had just happened. And a stranger joined them, and they didn't really pay much attention until the stranger asked, "What are you talking about? Are you the only one in Jerusalem who has not heard what has happened? The cross, the empty tomb? There has been so much." "You are foolish and slow of heart. Listen." And he opened the scripture to them. "Do you remember how we were trapped in Egypt? And Moses led us through the water into freedom? Do you remember how we were trapped in our freedom in the desert and God gave Moses the 10 Commandments to guide us? Do you remember how we were trapped in exile and the prophets said a child would lead us and someone would come to suffer and die so that we might be really alive?" And by the time they made it to Emmaus, the miles had passed quickly as the stranger talked. He was about to go on when the two asked him to stay. And when they sat at supper at the inn, the stranger took a piece of bread, and he gave thanks to God for it, and he broke it. Then he shared it with the two, and that is when they knew who he was. And in that moment, he was gone. Known in doubt. It was dark in Jerusalem, and the disciples gathered in a room with the doors shut. They were afraid that soldiers would come and take them. And someone said, "Peace be with you." They looked, and it was he. And they thought it was a ghost at first. And then he talked to them. They saw his wounds, and they opened, and he ate a piece of fish. And he opened the scriptures as he had on the road to Emmaus. And then finally he said, "Peace be with you," and he was gone. Thomas had been away that night. And when they told him the next day, he could not believe what had happened. And he said, "I won't believe until I touch his wounds." And why wouldn't he have some doubt? Their minds were stretching to become big enough to know Jesus in a new way. 8 days passed. The disciples gathered again with the door shut. And this time Thomas was there. And a voice said, "Peace be with you." It was he. And this time he went right up to Thomas and he held out his hand. "Touch me." And all Thomas could do was fall on his knees. "My Lord, my God." And Jesus looked at him a long time. "Do you believe because you have seen?" He then slowly looked around the whole crowd and said, "Blessed are those who have seen, who have not seen, and yet believe." Known in the morning. In the morning, the sky had turned pink and then blue, and they could make out on the shore smoke and a person standing there. "Have you caught anything?" And all they could say was, "No." "Throw your nets on the other side." Well, what could they lose? They pulled the empty nets and they threw them out on the other side. And they could feel the fish moving as they held the ropes. What could they... John was not paying attention to fish. He leaned forward and he watched. He watched the man moving on the shore. And he said to Peter, "That is the Lord." And Peter stood up. He jumped and he swam and he felt the water and then he felt the sand beneath his feet. The others turned the boat toward the land, and their nets were so full that they could not pull them in. And they dragged them behind the boat. When they gathered around the fire, the stranger was no stranger. They all knew it was Jesus, but they were afraid to say anything. "Have some breakfast." The fish were cooking on the fire, and he gave them fish and bread, and they talked as they ate. The fish and the bread also tasted of home. Then Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" "Yes, of course." "Feed my lambs." "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Tend my sheep." "Do you love me?" "You already know I do." "Feed my sheep." He then began to talk to Peter about growing old and how you need help in an old age. Sometimes people tell you what to do, even if you don't want them to. Years later, they wondered if Jesus had been preparing Peter for his death in Rome as an old man. Jesus said, "Follow me." Did he mean all of them? No. Peter got up, and the two of them walked along the shoreline. Peter looked back and saw John following them. "What about this man? Will he die like the rest of us?" It is not for you to know such things." And Peter fell silent, and Jesus was gone. Now, I wonder if you have anything around you that reminds you of any of those pieces that we heard this week. Anything that reminds you of being known in absence, being known in the breaking of bread, being known in doubt, and being known in the morning.